Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a simple question. When a woman speaks up for herself, sets boundaries, or refuses to shrink herself to fit someone else's expectations, why is she suddenly labeled as rude? Why, when she becomes a wife or a daughter-in-law, do those labels grow sharper, harsher, more unforgiving? Is it really her tone that's the problem, or is it the fact that she finally has one? We live in a world where a woman is applauded for her grace, but only if it's silent. She's celebrated for her strength as long as it's convenient, but the moment she stops nodding quietly, the moment she dares to question, demand, or disagree, she becomes difficult, disrespectful, or worse, bad to me's. Why does this happen? Because we've conditioned ourselves to see obedience as virtue and assertion as rebellion, especially when it comes from a woman wearing a Mangal Sutra or serving tea in her in-laws' living room. A woman enters a home after marriage not as a servant, not as a scapegoat, and definitely not as someone who must erase herself to belong. But how often is she expected to mold herself, to sacrifice her identity, to carry the weight of what will people say? While still smiling politely through it all, and when she stops pretending, when she calls out unfairness, when she says, "I'm not okay with this," suddenly she's labeled disrespectful, not traditional enough, not soft enough, not woman enough. But let's be honest, what we really mean is, she's not submissive enough. The truth is, we never call a woman rude for staying quiet and suffering. We call her rude the moment she chooses self-respect over silence. Here's the irony. The same fire in a man is called leadership. The same honesty is called confidence. The same confrontation is called courage. But in a woman, especially a wife, especially a daughter-in-law, it's called badzebani. But let me tell you something powerful. Being a wife doesn't mean being voiceless. Being a daughter-in-law doesn't mean being invisible. Being respectful doesn't mean erasing yourself. It's time we flip the narrative. Stop measuring women by how quietly they suffer. Start valuing them for how boldly they rise. And the next time you hear someone say, "She's too outspoken for a wife," or "She's changed after marriage," smile. Because maybe, just maybe, she didn't change. She just stopped pretending. And that, my friends, is not rudeness. That is reclamation of voice, of dignity, of self. And there is nothing more graceful than a woman who knows her worth and isn't afraid to live it unapologetically. Assertiveness in women is misread as disrespect. Society often mislabels a woman's confidence and self-expression as rudeness, especially when she speaks up within family roles. Cultural expectations glorify silence over self-worth. Women are praised for enduring silently, but judged when they choose dignity, boundaries, and voice. Roles like wife and daughter-in-law come with unfair standards. These roles demand unconditional sacrifice and silence, often stripping women of their individuality. Double standards between men and women persist. Traits like leadership, courage, and honesty are celebrated in men, but criticized in women in traditional family settings. Choosing self-respect is not disrespect when a woman stops pretending and starts expressing. It's not rebellion, it's self-awareness and healing. Reclaiming one's voice is a form of power, not rebellion. A woman who refuses to be silenced isn't rude. She's reclaiming her identity and redefining her worth unapologetically. Let me know if you want any keynote expanded into a longer segment. When a woman asserts herself, when she finally speaks not out of obligation but from a place of truth, the world doesn't always applaud. Instead, it often winces, especially when she holds the title of wife or daughter-in-law. Her assertiveness is met not with respect but with resistance. She's labeled rude, arrogant, or too much, but pause for a moment and ask, is it truly her tone that's offensive, or is it the discomfort that comes from watching a woman refuse to shrink? From a young age, girls are trained, sometimes softly, sometimes cruelly, to be agreeable, to smile when uncomfortable, to remain quiet in the face of injustice, to adjust, to understand, and to always consider others' feelings before her own. And when that same girl grows up and becomes someone's wife or someone's daughter, in law, those expectations don't dissolve, they multiply. Now, she must bend not only to society's norms, but also to the emotional temperature of an entire household. In that household, when she begins to express herself, not to insult or provoke, but simply to exist fully, something happens. Her confidence is confused with defiance, her no sounds like rebellion, her need for space is mistaken for disrespect, and the very people who once praised her grace begin whispering, "She's changed," but here's the truth no one says aloud: she hasn't changed. She's evolved. She's stepping into her own voice, and the discomfort isn't because she's suddenly rude. It's because she's no longer submissive. She's no longer ready to dim her light for the comfort of others. That shift threatens the old order, the one where women are revered as long as they are silent. We rarely question a man's tone when he speaks with authority. We call him confident. We say he's a natural leader. But when a woman says the same words with the same clarity, the same force, suddenly she's too aggressive or lacking respect. This is the double standard we've inherited, and women in family roles feel its weight the heaviest. Marriage does not come with a vow to erase yourself. Being a daughter-in-law doesn't mean becoming background noise. These roles should never require a woman to compromise her core. Yet, when she holds her ground, she's told she's too bold. When she refuses to be the emotional sponge for everyone's projections, she's accused of being cold. Let's be honest. What we often want from women in these roles is compliance, not connection. We want them to adapt, not evolve. And when they stop pretending, stop nodding along, we panic. But maybe the panic is ours to sit with, not theirs to soothe. What we call rudeness is often just a woman setting a boundary. What we call bad manners is often just her refusing to betray herself. And what we call a bad daughter-in-law is often just a woman who has the courage to say, "This version of me that you expect, I can't live in her skin anymore. She is not rude, she is real, and that should not be her crime." Her voice doesn't need permission, her worth isn't negotiable, and the sooner we stop mislabeling her strength as disrespect, the sooner we'll learn what true respect really looks like. Because when a woman stops conforming and starts claiming her space, the world doesn't fall apart. It begins to rebuild itself around truth. And that, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel, is exactly the shift we need. 1/2 From the time she learns to walk, a woman is taught how to sit properly, how to smile without being too loud, how to speak without offending, and how to listen more than she talks. The conditioning begins early, wrapped in pretty words like culture, values, and respect. She is told that silence is strength, that sacrifice is her crown, and that compromise is her highest virtue. So when she becomes a wife or a daughter-in-law, these lessons are not questioned, they are expected. She steps into her new roles not as a full human being, but as a sculpture carved by everyone else's expectations. But the cost of silence is heavy, the pressure to always say yes, to always nod in agreement, to always put others first slowly begins to crush the core of who she truly is. And the tragedy is when she finally begins to reclaim that core, when she says, "Enough, I have needs too, I have boundaries, I have a voice," the world turns on her, not because she's doing something wrong, but because she's breaking the script. Culture has glorified the suffering of women for generations. A woman who endures pain quietly is seen as noble. A daughter-in-law who absorbs insults and still serves with a smile is praised as ideal. A wife who tolerates indifference, disloyalty, or abuse and still cooks dinner on time is called strong. But the one who stands up and says, "I will not tolerate this," becomes a villain. Suddenly, she is not adjusting. She is not understanding. She is not good enough. This glorification of silence is nothing more than control dressed up as tradition. It teaches women that their value lies in how much they can endure, not how deeply they can live. That their pride is in their patience, not their power. And this twisted narrative has gone on for too long. Choosing yourself is not selfish. Drawing a boundary is not disrespectful. And protecting your peace is not a crime. But when a woman, especially in a home where she is expected to serve more than speak, finally honors her truth, it shakes the foundation of the entire system, because the system was never built for her voice. It was built on her silence. That's why women are labeled as bad-to-me's when they stop playing along, not because they are actually rude or rebellious, but because they stop letting themselves be erased. And that kind of strength terrifies people who benefit from her silence. So when she speaks, don't ask why she sounds angry. Ask why she had to hold it in for so long. When she stops saying yes to everything, don't call her difficult. Ask how many times she said yes while dying a little inside. When she chooses peace over performance, don't say she's changed. Realize she's finally coming home to herself. Let's stop celebrating women only when they are suffering in silence. Let's start honoring them when they say no more. Let's stop teaching our daughters to keep the peace at the cost of their power. And most importantly, let's remember real respect begins when a woman no longer has to disappear to be loved. When a woman steps into the role of a wife or daughter-in-law, something subtle but deeply damaging begins to happen. She stops being seen as a person with her own dreams, flaws, voice, and fire, and starts being seen only through the lens of responsibility. Her value becomes defined by how well she can serve, adjust, and compromise. She is expected to smile even when she's hurting, to agree even when she disagrees, and to accept rules she had no part in creating. These expectations are not spoken out loud. They are etched silently into family dinners, glances from elders, and phrases like "this is how it's always been." She may have been bold and vibrant before marriage. She may have had opinions that sparked conversations, ambition that lit up rooms. But now, if she raises her voice, she's told she's disrespectful. If she takes time for herself, she's labeled selfish. If she pushes back against unfair treatment, she's seen as ungrateful. The moment she stops being passive, people stop calling her sanskari and start calling her batamis. But why are these standards so rigid, so cruel, and so specific only to women? Why is it that the same qualities we admire in a man, firmness, decisiveness, emotional boundaries, are punished in a woman the moment she becomes part of another family? A husband is allowed to express anger, demand space, and assert his needs. He's not seen as rude for doing so. He's seen as human, but the daughter-in-law, she must always keep her emotions neatly folded behind her eyes, her voice dipped in sweetness, and her individuality locked behind the title of good wife. We forget that becoming a wife or daughter-in-law doesn't mean becoming a servant of traditions. It doesn't mean giving up one's basic right to self-respect. It means forming a partnership, not signing away your identity. Yet somehow women are constantly asked to shrink, and when they refuse, they're judged, whispered about, criticized behind closed doors, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're daring to be visible in spaces that were designed to keep them small. It's exhausting to keep playing a role that doesn't allow room for your real self to breathe, and eventually something breaks. The woman who once tried so hard to please everyone realizes that no matter how much she bends, it will never be enough. So she stops bending, she straightens her spine, she starts saying what she feels, She starts showing up as she truly is, and in that moment of reclaiming herself, the world around her doesn't celebrate. It calls her rude. But what they call rude is really just freedom. What they call rebellion is simply a woman remembering that she is not just someone's daughter, in-law, or wife. She is someone, her own person, whole, powerful, deserving. And no role should ever ask her to forget that. She is not made to fit into boxes created by fear and outdated norms. She is made to live, breathe, speak, grow. So if the world wants to call her rude for not breaking under pressure, let them. She's not here to be liked. She's here to be real. In every household where tradition weighs heavier than truth, a quiet injustice plays out every day. It happens in the pauses between conversations, in the forced smiles, in the whispered complaints behind closed doors. A man, when he is firm, when he demands space, when he raises his voice, he is never questioned. He is seen as confident, strong, willed, a leader. But when a woman does the same, especially when she's a wife or a daughter, in law, the reaction shifts completely. She's not called strong, she's not called wise, she's called badamise, disrespectful, rebellious. This double standard has lived for generations, passed down from mother, in-law to daughter, in-law, from society to household, from father to son. A man is given space to be human, to be angry, silent, imperfect. He can assert his needs, walk away from conflict, and still be seen as dignified. But a woman, the moment she even dares to express what she feels, she's accused of bringing shame, dishonor, or negativity into the family. Her emotions are never seen as valid, only inconvenient. We see it every day, don't we? A husband can come home, sit silently, not lift a finger, and no one calls it disrespect. But if the wife comes home tired, chooses to be quiet, or dares to say, "I need a moment," suddenly she's not adjusting, she's too proud. The same family that expects her to care for everyone doesn't care to ask how she feels, and the moment she shows that she has boundaries, the labels begin. We have glorified male behavior for so long that we don't even notice the injustice anymore. A man who shuts down emotionally is considered under stress. A woman who does the same is considered rude. A man who challenges authority is admired. A woman who challenges unfairness in the household is labeled difficult, and it becomes even more heartbreaking when other women in the family, those who once bore the same pain, reinforce these rules. Because they were taught that suffering silently is the price you pay to be accepted. But what happens when a woman refuses to pay that price anymore? What happens when she chooses truth over tradition? She becomes the storm everyone is afraid of. Not because she's destroying anything, but because she's shaking the silence that kept everyone comfortable. We call it sanskar, to remain silent, to put others first, to never question. But what about the sanskar of fairness, of mutual respect, of truth? A woman who speaks is not a disgrace to her family. She's a wake-up call to the parts of the family that have gone unchecked for too long. She's not disrespectful. She's not aggressive. She's someone who's tired of carrying the emotional weight of everyone else while being blamed for simply wanting space to breathe. And the sad part is the world rarely listens to her until she stops speaking gently. It's only when she says no loudly, when she draws a line, that people turn their heads. But instead of hearing her pain, they judge her volume. This double standard must end, because respect cannot be one-sided. Dignity cannot be gendered, and truth should never be silenced just because it's spoken by a woman in a sari, in the kitchen, or at the dining table. So the next time someone calls a woman rude for asserting her boundaries, ask yourself this: would we say the same if it were a man? If the answer is no, then the problem isn't her attitude. The problem is our lens. A woman who chooses herself is often mistaken for someone who has forgotten her place. Especially when she's a wife or daughter-in-law, her identity is constantly measured by how much she can give, endure, and sacrifice. The day she decides to stop bleeding emotionally for the comfort of others, the world doesn't say she's healing, it says she's changed. But the truth is, she hasn't changed. She's simply begun to remember who she is beyond the labels. We are taught to celebrate women who stay quiet, who say yes even when they mean no, who give up their dreams to support someone else's. And while sacrifice can be noble, it is not a woman's only value. The dangerous part is when we equate her silence with virtue and her voice with disrespect. We don't call her rude when she's crying behind closed doors. We don't judge her when she's bending beyond what's fair. But the moment she says, "This is not okay," the moment she says, "I deserve better," suddenly she's ungrateful, suddenly she's a problem. But choosing self-respect over silent suffering isn't arrogance. It's awareness. It's the moment a woman stops asking for permission to be herself and starts reclaiming her emotional space. She realizes that being a wife or daughter-in-law doesn't mean being everyone's emotional cushion. She is not there to absorb pain without expressing her own. And when she finally refuses to be the family's punching bag, she's labeled as difficult. But really, she's just done playing a role that demanded her silence. When she prioritizes her mental health, people say she's selfish. When she chooses rest over running around pleasing everyone, she's called lazy. When she no longer lets herself be manipulated by guilt, she's called heartless. The tragedy isn't that people say these things. The tragedy is that for so long she believed them, but there comes a point where something inside her shifts. She stops needing everyone's approval. She stops explaining herself to those committed to misunderstanding her. She stops shrinking so others can feel big, and that moment, that quiet, powerful decision is not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough, and yes, it's uncomfortable not for her, but for the people who benefited from her silence. Her change disturbs the status quo, because the version of her they loved was the one who didn't know she had a choice, the one who tolerated things just to keep the peace. But peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of truth. And her truth no longer fits into the small spaces they gave her. Let's be clear, choosing herself doesn't mean she doesn't care. It means she cares enough to not abandon herself anymore. It means she's not willing to lose her voice just to belong. It means she finally understands that respect should be mutual, not conditional. And if people can't love her without her silence, then maybe they never loved her, only her obedience. She is not rude. She is not rebellious. She is rising. She is remembering. She is reclaiming. And that kind of power doesn't need validation. It just needs room to breathe. There is something profoundly powerful about a woman who reclaims her voice, not by shouting, not by arguing, but simply by refusing to be silenced anymore. The moment she decides that her feelings matter, that her truth is valid, and that her existence is not up for compromise, everything changes. But instead of being celebrated, she is often condemned. Society doesn't call it strength, it calls it rebellion. It doesn't see her evolution as healing, it sees it as a threat, and that's the tragedy. When a woman, especially in the role of a wife or daughter-in-law, starts reclaiming her identity, the discomfort isn't because she's doing anything wrong. It's because she's breaking generational patterns that benefited from her silence. For too long, women have been taught that being good means being invisible, that keeping the family together means keeping their emotions bottled up, that the highest form of love is sacrifice, even if it costs them their sense of self. But now, more women are waking up. They're realizing that respect is not owed to them only when they're convenient. They are realizing that being kind does not mean being a doormat. And when they start speaking, not from anger but from awareness, they're often met with disbelief. People say she's changed, as if growth is a betrayal. But the only thing she's betraying is the version of herself who accepted less than she deserved. She no longer allows her identity to be defined by how well she pleases others. She stops living on the edge of everyone's moods, trying to keep the peace. She begins to take up space in the room, in the conversation, and in her own life, and that space she claims is sacred. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It's clear, grounded, and unapologetic, yet the world reacts. It flinches because it's used to seeing her quiet. It's comfortable when she's agreeable. It's safe when she's predictable. But she was not born to make everyone comfortable. She was born to live fully, to feel deeply, to speak honestly. She was not created to be a statue of sacrifice, bowing down in the name of tradition. She is not rude for refusing to disappear. She is not arrogant for wanting to be heard. She is not selfish for choosing her own peace. The ones who call her rude don't understand what it took to find that voice. They don't see the nights she cried quietly, the times she swallowed her anger, the years she went unheard. They don't know how heavy it is to carry generations of unspoken pain, and then choose to break that cycle. That takes courage, that takes fire, that takes a kind of rebellion that doesn't burn things down but rebuilds them, stronger, freer, and more honest. And if that kind of truth makes people uncomfortable, so be it. She is not here to be everyone's version of a perfect woman. She is here to be whole, fully, fiercely, finely. So when she stands tall and speaks clearly, let the world call her whatever it wants. Because her voice isn't just hers. It's an echo of every woman who was told to stay quiet. And now that silence is over,